And we are live. This is They Talk Funny, episode 20, with my special guest today, Mr. Ben MacLean. Ben, how are you
Hello.
doing?
I'm good. How are you, Paul? Long time no see.
Yeah, it has been a while since we've seen each other. We met 2015, I think it was.
That sounds about right.
I went to Berlin and I got on your Go West comedy show because I was a Canadian and you were kind enough to
Right.
put me on it.
You
And it
know,
turned out to be that was the Pride edition or the Christopher Street Day Week Festival
right.
edition of the show. So it was so much amazing fun. You put on a great show in Berlin. For those who are just joining, Ben is a comedian as well as producer based in Berlin, but originally from Canada. Ben has worked as a well, you worked in the ambassador services. You was a diplomat and also a flight attendant. But you managed. You were a semi-finalist in Britain's So You Think You're Funny competition.
Yeah, exactly. That was back in 2016.
Now that's sponsored by.
I think it's operated by the Gilded Balloon. It's part of that group of shows in Edinburgh at the Fringe.
Yes,
that's that's the system that it's involved in. Yeah,
which again, the Gilded Balloon is quite well known internationally thanks to everything they do with the Edinburgh Fringe. So yeah, it's one of the hot spots, one of the places that people have to play if they're going to be making it in the UK. So you've actually traveled doing comedy as well. I mean, you're based in Berlin. Did you not start comedy until you moved to Berlin, or?
I started here actually. I did. So I've been doing comedy technically for just over 7 years. And I started by doing a weekend course in London. This was in 2013.
London, Ontario?
Sorry, in London, England. Sorry.
London, England, the real London.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You know, not to drop names, but the London, the OG London. And it's just easier for me to go there for a weekend course than just to London, Ontario. But so yeah, no, I got a gift from a friend to do this weekend course, and it's run by Laughing Horse, which is another group of like comedy clubs and promoters and stuff in the UK. And yeah, it was a very basic course. I think it was a total of maybe like 8 hours of instruction. And then at the end of the weekend, there were 7 or 8 students, and we all had to do a 5-minute set at the end of that course. Right. And yeah, I had a great time. I got like very positive feedback, and you know, that cliche feeling that we all talk about, like you just can't get enough of it. And I was like, yeah, this is something that I want to pursue more seriously. So then I didn't do really any comedy after that for about a year, and then decided to get off my arse and do it again. And then started in Berlin, because as you know from visiting us here, we have a lot of opportunities here to do open mics. And
Berlin as a comedy city. I want to mention that I noticed that we have a number of viewers. If you want to just say hi, just say something in the chat. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat box, and we can present them to Ben. Yeah, Berlin is an amazing city for its culture. It's also so easy because there's so many expats from English-speaking parts of the world. Now, you worked in the Canadian diplomatic service. Was Berlin your first stop doing that, or?
No, it was my third assignment, actually. So I started in Ottawa, as we all do, and then I went to Port-au-Prince in Haiti for a couple of years, which was an incredible experience. It wasn't anywhere that I was tempted to do any English stand-up comedy, though. And then I went to Brussels. I was posted there for 4 years. And that's actually where I think I first went to stand-up shows, because Brussels has a few opportunities as well for people doing English comedy. And then went back to Ottawa, and then had a total of 5 years in Berlin, different positions, before I decided to call it quits with the public service. So
yes.
Yeah.
As a question, as an Anglophone living in Montreal, how many languages do you speak?
So I speak English is obviously my mother tongue. I learned French through French immersion growing up. Like I grew up in a super Anglophone region of Nova Scotia, and my family is all Anglophone, but I learned French through French immersion, a late immersion as we call it, so from grade 7 to grade 12. And then I studied German a bit at university. And so my German, French, and English are all solid. And then I speak like a bit of Spanish. I've tried doing stand-up in Spanish once, but it was a little bit rocky. But
you couldn't pull that fish out of water charm.
You know, I think most people are always kind of, they find it endearing when you struggle in their language. It's like a lot of they appreciate the effort. And I think it's like when I do comedy in German, obviously I make mistakes and some of my pronunciation is a little bit wacky. And but Germans are always like, oh, you know, he's Canadian, he's speaking. It's kind of like you're a dancing monkey or something. It's a bit it's kind of, I like the attention, but I also find it a little bit patronizing sometimes. But anyhow, so
yes, there's Montreal has a number of bilingual shows. It's sort of really grown over, say, maybe the past 8 years. And there's one of my favorite English comics whose French is good. Went and he was doing his set and he got heckled, and so he just sort of politely explained that he had practiced everything verbatim. But so he just says that in French, is, you know, and anytime he was heckled, he just used that same sentence, which in itself was its own level of joke.
But I mean, seriously, that's what a lot of people do. And I do that in German too. Like I'm quite confident now interacting with people spontaneously. But if people do throw some word at you, you just don't understand, then you get thrown off. But I kind of also like it because you can just kind of ignore it and just keep steam rolling through. And that's what I do.
That's what some people don't understand. We can hear them when we're on stage, but we can't hear them as clearly as they can hear us thanks to the microphone.
And I guess even in English, sometimes the more I think about it, you know, you don't respond to every heckle in English either, because sometimes you like the person was kind of, you don't know if they were like sneezing or if they actually wanted to say something about your set or whatever. So you can kind of just, you know,
ignore
excuses every once in a while if you have to. So
yeah, it's I will usually try to ignore the first one at any time and then interact with a positive nature for the second one. And then if they prove to be annoying, I don't mind mentioning their moms.
Right.
But so yeah, this show is generally, it's about writing comedy, but you're also a pretty successful producer, because you have the Go West and you have the Fetish Comedy Show in Berlin, and you just did your Canada Day. Was it a pay-per-view? Or
no, it was a free online streamed event sponsored or organized by the Embassy of Canada here in Berlin.
Okay.
Using those old connections that I have. But yeah, that was a very different beast. Like, it was a great experience, but it was, I don't know, you've probably done these corporate events too, where the money was great and I'm very grateful for the opportunity, but at the same time, I didn't have any input on the running order and I knew I had to be super, super cautious about everything that I talked about.
Yes,
not to talk on any, not to touch on any of our political issues in Canada so it was like, it was very, very tricky. But that was more like for that Canada Day show, I kind of was given the script that they wanted me to do. And then I came up with my text to fill in to make it a bit more, bit more
comedy,
fun as much as I could, but as much as you can in a government situation. And that was that. But yeah, the other shows that I run, I've been doing Go West now since 2015. So you would have performed just after we started.
Yeah, I think I was. It was Hamburger Mary's. It wasn't long after that you moved away from there.
Yeah, well, so there was a branch of the American gay hamburger chain, Hamburger Mary's. There was one of those in Berlin, unfortunately didn't survive. And then it turned into another kind of LGBT oriented restaurant. So we kept doing the show there. And then eventually, long story short, it's now a not very gay positive restaurant in a gay hotel. That's sometimes how business works. So now we've moved into an LGBT community center, which is a lovely arrangement. We really love where we are now. It's super. So
your audiences was so welcoming, and I went back for another show later in the week, because I mean it was Pride Week, all the shows. It was, the audience was perfect. It was such a welcoming environment, not just as somebody go to watch a show, but also somebody performing. It was fantastic.
Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I appreciate your intro, making it sound like I'm a producer extraordinaire. I'll be the first to admit I'm not really. I think we're all struggling. Yeah, we're all doing our best, but that is one thing that I'm proud of, is that even if we might not always have like a sellout show, the reputation of the show has been very solid over the 5 years. So people know that it's where performers feel that they're respected. We do what we can to share the money that we have, and the crowd is not aggressive. So it's usually a very open-minded audience. So it was great. And you had a variety of levels of talent on the show as well, which I always appreciate, because not only are you listening to like different voices, different points of view, but you're also giving people experience who in a better quality show than they might not normally receive. And as a producer, that's always been kind of my mandate as well, like with the open mic style shows. And I think it shows heart when it comes to the performance, when you can show that and show like a sense of community that is inclusive. And I think the thing too, like it's also to support people in their art and make them want to do it again, even if they're just starting out and they're kind of finding their legs. That's part of it. But I'm also the first to admit that someone else's comedy that I might not really enjoy as much, like other people do really love that style of comedy. And so if I kind of use this ridiculous, if I curate the show and it's all like just Ben's style of comedy, that's really boring for people. So I still, even though Go West has a reputation for being more queer oriented, we have people who don't fit that label at all. And the audience appreciates that, just because it shakes things up a little bit. So
you had me on, and I'd hope you'd have me on again.
For sure, Paul. For sure.
Yeah. No, it was great. It was like I said, the audience was very welcoming, and you, especially like for those unfamiliar, First 3 Day Week festival is Pride, what they call Pride in Germany.
Exactly. The Germans decided to go back to the original name. I mean, it makes sense, because where the Stonewall riots happened was Christopher Street.
Yeah.
But no one else in the world calls it that. But anyhow, the Germans, they decided they'd be very factual about it, and we can't put a name for that. So yeah.
It's very precise and historically accurate. Now what? Okay, so it was, you get a gift certificate that gave you this course. Now, why did the friend think that you wanted to take?
Well, if you want to, it was actually my ex. So I had.
Were they your ex at the time they gave you the gift, or?
Yeah. So I mean, we had only been together for like six months, and I think when you meet someone and you're kind of sharing all your dreams, your crazy things that maybe you want to do, and I think you're still supportive of that in the early phase of the relationship, because anything's possible. Like, we'll make this happen, and that's the phase that we were at. And I'm very grateful that he did that, because I'm a kind of person I often need a bit of a push to get off my behind, to actually take the leap to try something new. And so it was a Christmas gift from my ex, and he was there in the audience when I did my first set. I will tell you, if you're going to have your partner record your sets, though, make sure that you get the footage off of their devices before you break up. That's a lesson learned from that experience. So, so the first set, I will never have the footage of that. But yeah, I have a photo which I somehow managed to find off Facebook or something. So yeah,
I'm surprised that the course didn't also include getting a taping of your first routine.
Yeah,
that's usually the normal, but
yeah,
you said that was 2013.
That was 2013. Yeah. The internet barely existed at that point. I don't know. It was a very different time, Paul. Yeah. But honestly, yeah, no, it's a really good point. It's funny that didn't even come up.
Now, since we mentioned the internet, we want to make sure that everyone knows how to find you. So there is a benmaclean.com, which is also takes you to the Facebook, your Facebook page.
Yeah, it takes me to my Facebook page. Yeah,
the Ben MacLean on Facebook and Instagram. So Instagram is Ben__MacLean. Just so we have that.
Yeah.
And on Twitter, you are Ben_MacLean, just the single underscore. Just
keeping you on your toes there.
Yeah, exactly. And typing with the thumbs on the phone, so much difficulty. I don't even speak English, and here you are, like doing comedy in 3 different languages. It's well, attempting with the Spanish. You've never done comedy in French?
That's funny. I've never done an actual set in French, even though I consider French to be my second language. German's kind of taking over, and then I'm starting to feel more confident in German than I do in French. But no, I've only done, for example, these Government of Canada events that I've helped host, and so I've done a bit of crowd work and stuff in French with those events. But yeah, I have friends here in Berlin who do French language comedy shows who are like, Ben, would you just do it? Like, come and do 5 minutes, and I'll do that as soon as we can safely get back on stage, I'm sure. So
this has taken me in 2 different branches. I wanted to point out, like, in Switzerland, there's actually another Canadian producer in Europe who has a small circuit of shows where people perform in German, English, and in French. Of course, Swiss French is a little bit different than Canadian French, but I'm sure many of the same ideas can be brought across, and of course there's the English audience, etc.
Yeah.
How has the lockdown, though, affected you in Berlin and comedy in Berlin?
Yeah, so I guess I'll try to summarize how things evolved, because we were kind of living our lives and thinking, of course, that the COVID situation would be far away and wouldn't be anything that we had to worry about. And then we had a lady on our scene who got it. And this was back in March. And there were probably a total of about 10 to 15 of us who had performed with her at mics.
Sharing a microphone.
Exactly, yeah. And for example, at one show, I was the person who went up right after her. And according to the health authorities here, then a lot of us had to go into quarantine after that, including myself. And then everyone was negative, thank goodness. And that lady's fine. She didn't really get too bad of a case. So there was that side of it at the beginning. And I think it kind of went from people thinking, oh, like this is nothing to worry about, to everyone all of a sudden shutting down all the shows. And then the opinion online, I would say, was mostly after a bit of resistance from people who depend on their open mics and stuff for their money. After a bit of resistance, people were like, okay, yeah, we're not going to do any shows for a while. And then starting about a month ago already, there was an exception in the law here in Berlin that you could perform, or sorry, the restaurants were the first things to open. And they didn't strictly say that in a restaurant you couldn't do a comedy show. So some people were very creative and did like a food, it's not really dinner theater or dinner comedy, but it was just like they'd serve pretzels or something very light on the table. And then at the same time, you know, and I can't blame those folks for being very creative. Yeah. So there was that first. And then slowly bars opened up a few weeks later. And there are quite a few shows operating right now with what I would refer to as theoretical social distancing, because I don't, again, I know like a lot of my comedy colleagues, they rely on their income from the shows, and I don't want to judge them for that. I have a day job, so my situation's a bit different. But I know from hearing from my producer friends behind the scenes. They're like, yeah, when the show's running, like people move the chairs around, and it's very difficult to tell people who walk into the venue during the show that they can't come in because the capacity has been reached. And that's kind of where we are right now. So we have these shows operating in venues with this mandated distancing. People don't have to wear a mask when they're in the audience sitting at their table, but if they're walking to go to the toilet, for example, they have to wear a mask. It's a weird rule. And then some people are also organizing outdoor shows. That's happening. So
there is okay, there's the quote that just came out from a police officer in the UK. I think it was yesterday, saying it's crystal clear drunk people don't know how to socially distance. And so there is that discussion that they might be shutting the bars down again in at least London. They've just recently reopened bars here in Montreal. I don't know if you're aware, is one of the worst hit cities in North America, in the world, actually. We're in the top 10. There was one bar, though, that has just because they were so bad at social distancing, there's been a number of cases directly linked to it. So it's bar 1030, I think it's called. I'd have to double check that. But the Comedy Nest is reopened, and they are being very strict. They're giving out masks at the door. I guess when you get your drink, you can pull your mask down. And they're very much enforcing seating. And it's a comedy club with about 175 capacity, and they're letting in no more than 50. And for performers, they're switching mics out. So the host has their mic, and then each performer goes up with a mic and takes it off, where it's clean between performers.
That's also something that some shows are doing here. I think some shows are disinfecting the mics, and other shows encourage you to bring your own mic that you connect when you go up. So yeah, I don't know, like, again, I don't want to like give people a hard time for wanting to perform. I guess, though, our perspective in Berlin is affected by the fact that we didn't really have many cases here. It didn't get as bad as it got in Montreal, for example. So we had a couple weeks where people were a bit on edge, and then everything started easing. And so I think I get the sense from a lot of people here that the perspective is, let's not overreact. We have it under control. I guess I'm a bit more cautious, though, because I'm kind of like, just because we didn't experience that doesn't mean we're not going to experience it still.
You're not vaccinated yet. And
exactly. And for me personally, like, I'd rather lay relatively low for another few months, if that means that there's going to be a vaccine, for example, and then we just get back on track relatively normally. But it's everyone has to make that call for themselves, I guess. So
you're very much a health conscious person as well. You work out, you take care of your body.
I guess thank you, but I mean, it's also, I'm going to the gym too. Like, I have to be quick to admit that. So, because a lot of people, they're like, oh, Ben must be hiding at home all the time and not doing that. Like, I'm going to the gym, and that's probably one of the stupidest things to do right now. So I'm quick to admit that as well. But yeah, I don't know. It's a looking after yourself. It's also, it's kind of an ethical situation, I find. Like, if you're running a show and you have people coming in, and like in Germany, you have to take everyone's names down. They have to, in case you have to do contact tracing after possible exposure. And for me, that also, it's a big ethical can of worms, because then what do you do if someone gets sick at your show, in part because you didn't have the proper setup to keep people safe while they were there to have a good night? I don't know. It's kind of tricky. So
there is a musician friend of mine who lives in the States, contracted COVID, and he ended up, they were releasing him from quarantine, and then he ended up having to go back in because it wasn't just the 2 weeks. He ended up losing lung capacity permanently, and he has that burning sensation in his skin all over. So even now that he's clear, there is still lasting effects that you know, it's going to be part of him forever. So I would like to wait for, you know, a vaccine or something, just to know that not only am I safe, but I'm also not spreading it to others.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is, and when you're also talking about green rooms in a venue and how small they are, and the you know, it's the volume of air that is being shared by everybody that's in there. It comes a question like a bigger venue, you know, with a small audience in it, the volume of air being shared isn't as bad. Actually, this brings us to, can we mention your day job?
Sure, of course, of course.
You work for Lufthansa.
I do.
So I take it you're on a break from that now, or are you still working flights?
So I was on leave without pay for a few months because we didn't know what was going to happen with the company. So they were kind of encouraging us to do that. And to be honest, I was happier to be at home and burn through my limited savings, but just to be here and not like exposing myself all the time. Because where I had that one experience with my comedy colleague, and then I had to be at home for 2 weeks, I was like, I don't want to have to do that all the time. Yes. But now I'm officially back at work, and I probably will fly again next week for the first time. Okay. So everything's still a little bit wobbly with the whole airline industry at the moment, but Lufthansa's, I think, managing it quite well, and we're optimistic, hopefully, that a lot of us will be able to keep our jobs. So. Yeah. Now,
you've toured a bit doing comedy. Has your job assisted in that? Because I noticed you've played in. Did you play in South Africa?
Exactly. Yeah. The bio. It has really helped the bio out, I can tell you, because it's like. No, there were a few places I've performed through my work. I performed in Cape Town. I performed in Seoul. I performed in Tokyo. I performed in LA, but it's not, I love my job and I love the traveling. But what a lot of people don't appreciate about being crew is that you are constantly exhausted. Yes. And so a lot of people think, you know, you just sashay off that plane when you get to LA and you're like, I'm gonna have wild, crazy sex all the time, and I'm gonna like perform at 3 open mics. And sometimes, I'll be honest, you just want to go to the grocery store and get yourself like a cheap sandwich, and then hide in your room for like 12 hours because you feel so dead. So that's kind of. I want to take
what's typical. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
What would be a typical layover? Is like just 12 hours after being. Is it what? 18 hours to from, say, Berlin to Los Angeles, or
I think that's probably about a 10-hour flight, 10 or 11-hour flight. And then because the way it works with European law and with our contract at work is it's based on the length of the flight and how many time zones you go through. That's what determines how many nights you get there in your layover. So, for example, in LA, we get 2 nights, but New York, which is still quite a long flight, it's like a 7-8 hour flight. You only get 1 night, right? So like one of the great comedy cities of the world, sometimes I get to the hotel at like 8 p.m., which for my body is 2 in the morning. It's not really the time for me to go to some of the most famous clubs in the world to be like, I want to show you everything I got, right?
Right.
So, I want to push myself to do that a bit more, but it doesn't always work out. So typical layover, it's usually just 1 night in most places. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the really far away places like South America or the West Coast of North America, then you get 2 nights. And that's a much better setup for comedy, because then what I've done, for example, in LA is I got a good night's sleep the first night, and then I felt like a human being again. And then I did an open mic the next night.
Right.
So
we actually have Claudio Silvio Capri. He's a Montreal comedian, very proudly of Italian descent. Is just saying, hey, dropping in. Welcome, Claudio. For those that are watching, please hit the like button, drop in a comment, let us know that you're here. If you have a question for Ben, just put it in the chat and we will put it up so Ben can answer. Now, you do the Go West. You also, it's a fetish comedy show is the other show you do?
So the Fetish Comedy Show is a concept that was developed by a guy named Olaf Hartmannsgruber. So he's a German guy who's very active in the fetish scene in Berlin. And he saw me perform at Go West, actually. This was back in 2016, I believe. And because Berlin is such a sex-oriented city, let's be honest, I mean, there are several like big events every year just for the fetish community. And so we were like, okay, maybe let's do some kind of fetish comedy show to give people a bit of variety, because again, people have all their preconceived notions about what the fetish scene is about. Obviously there's that side to it. There's a more sexual side to it, but a lot of people, like, you know, it's shopping, it's meeting up with friends, it's hanging out and socializing. And so comedy actually does fit with that quite well.
Right.
So.
You were Mr. Leather?
No, I've never, I don't have, I don't know. I'm not that dedicated to the scene to do that. And I'm also like the financial investment. Like if you are ever, if you're voted like Mr. German Leather, then you have a whole year of going to all of these, like you're doing a lot of club visits, like going to different nightclubs and stuff. You do a lot of outreach, which is great, but you need a lot of money to do that. And also, like, I haven't invested that much in all my leather outfits, I'll be honest. Some of these queens who like go out every year and buy like $3,000 worth of new leather, I'm like, no, I've got to pay my rent. So, but I did, I had the chance to co-host the Mr. Los Angeles Leather contest or pageant, whatever you want to call it. And that was 4 years ago already, actually. But that was a really cool opportunity to meet people in LA and to perform with Johnny McGovern, who does a show called Hey Queen online. So he was the other co-host. That was a really cool opportunity to be able to perform with him. So yeah.
I feel bad that I didn't get you on during Pride Month in
don't
Canada.
worry. Pride has no end, Paul.
Exactly. I think, we should be proud all year round. There's it's so weird to have Canadians talk about being proud. When it's most well, it's the novel, or not the novel, the book Why I Hate Canadians. One of the things that it lists Canadians are most proud of being is not American, which is, it's a little too on the nose. Now. You what was the so you think you're funny competition like going in there? How much material did you have to have prepped? Was there any coaching to it, or was it just go in, and how many rounds did you go through?
So I guess the thing about Berlin, as amazing as Berlin is for doing comedy, like there's not always a clear progression in terms of what you can do next. And so a few of these different contests that exist in the UK are a great opportunity, because you can kind of see if you might have a little bit of what it takes to be able to succeed professionally doing this full time or whatever. So it's a thing a lot of us do every year. What you do with So You Think You're Funny is you have to apply online. And I think you had to send a video in. A lot of it was just based on your bio, though, like how many shows you had done and at what point you were at in your career. I think that was their main concern. And then a lot of people got selected to do heats in the UK. So I did a heat in London at Angel Comedy, which is a really awesome club. I think it's near Angel Stations in Islington, I believe. Anyhow, it was like one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life. The compere was incredible. Like, he just did such an amazing job with the crowd. I managed to have some friends who were strangely enough in London that night, right in the front row, sending me all kinds of good vibes. And I just, everything fell exactly the way it was supposed to, and it was 7 minutes. So I didn't know if I was going to make it through to the semifinals based on that, but at least I told myself, it could not have gone any better.
Right.
Like sometimes you recognize after you perform that you goofed up or you tripped up on this thing or you forgot whatever, but that was just like everything was the way I wanted it to be. So You Think You're Funny, they have all these heats. They have a lot of them. I think they might even have like 10 or 15 of them all over the UK and Ireland. Mm-hmm. And then you get selected for a semi-final. And so I was very grateful to make it to that point. I think from Berlin, there were like 3 or 4 of us who made it to the semifinals. And I don't know how many people there were at that level. There probably were like 25 maybe or something, 25 or 30 comedians, or maybe it's even, anyhow, who made it to the semifinal level. And then I went to Edinburgh for Fringe and performed there. And that was like unlike anything I'd ever done before, because first of all, our scene in Berlin is so friendly. Yes. Don't get me wrong, we have our cat fights and there are cliques and all kinds of stuff. I don't want to make it sound like some kind of paradise. We have all that stuff, of course, but
I tell everybody it's paradise anyways. So
that's right. I shouldn't be here screwing our brand up, but anyhow, so it's generally the kind of place where even if you bomb, you'll go behind the scenes and people will be very supportive, and at least you'll have a drink with them or whatever, and everything will be fine and all that. But I think when I went to my semifinal for So You Think You're Funny in Edinburgh, that was the first time I realized there were like comedians in this, and they were in it to win it. And they had like, you could see it in their eyes, because I'm used to going to shows and always like introducing myself to everybody and being very Canadian. Yeah. And they were just like, you could tell they were like, we don't want any of this bullshit. We are gonna make, we're gonna beat you to a pulp up there. And I was like, okay, great. So I am not proud to say that was not a very good performance, because it seemed like it was doomed from the start, because what happened, and this is something that people should check now, I think, with the fact that we're changing mics all the time at shows because of the current situation, is when I went on stage at this big event in front of probably at least like 200 people, 250 in this big venue in Edinburgh, I took my mic out of the stand and the cord dropped out of the mic onto the stage. And I had never had that happen before. And I was so nervous to begin with that I was just like, oh my God. And, afterwards I thought of all these like witty things I could have said, like, about the cord dropping out and all kinds of things. And I just like was a deer in the headlights for probably about 3 or 4 seconds. And then I kept going. But needless to say, it was not the impression that I wanted to give in front of all of those like industry bigwigs and stuff. So that was as far as I went. But it was a great experience. And I went to Edinburgh and did a bunch of other shows. And I was there with other comedian friends from Berlin. And I remember, I don't know if you met Helen Bauer when you were here. I don't know if she was already on the scene at that time, but she's fantastic. And she started in Berlin, and now she's very active in Britain, and has done a lot of big competitions and stuff. And she was like, Ben, you're going to perform after this. So the very next day, because I was kind of licking my wounds, she was like, we're going to a show and you were performing. And we went to this event at this kind of open mic at the Fringe. And she went up to the people and was like, yeah, Ben's going to perform. And I was like, I didn't even really want to perform, but I'm glad that she was there and pushed me to do that, because it made me kind of get out of my funk and be like, everything will be fine and life goes on and stuff. So,
and this is added to the history of people pushing you into things just to get you off your ass to do it. Like,
I know. What can I say? That's why I anyhow, I just need that sometimes. It's who I am. So thanks for the psychoanalysis. It's true. I'm a very hesitant person a lot of the time. So yeah. So
how do you come about your material? Now you've got some great stories that you tell, but like, do you dedicate time each day to writing, or do you write only when inspiration hits, or what's your process?
I would say it's when inspiration hits. I've tried to be a good boy and do what everybody tells you to do and set aside like 15 minutes a day when you turn off all your devices and you don't, focus on anything other than just letting this stream of consciousness come out, and hopefully eventually some gold will land on the paper. That's what people tell you to do.
Yes.
I find usually what I do is I usually have like a scrap of paper in my pocket for some reason. And I just have some silly idea that comes to mind, and I'll just write it down, like even if it's just one sentence. before I forget it. And then I work with Evernote a lot too, the app. So then what I do is often I have like a document on Evernote where I have all of these different kind of, you know,
ideas or random
like
thoughts.
fetal, but yeah, these things are just kind of there and they haven't gone anywhere yet. And then I try to go back to those every once in a while and then latch onto one of those and then try to work it out at a mic. Sometimes that's what I do, but I don't. One thing that I want to be better at is being more methodical, because I'm usually quite a methodical person in a lot of ways. But when it comes to my comedy, I want to be better at recording what I do, listening to it, editing it down. I know that that's an area that I want to work on more to you know, take it to the next level, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Now you've mentioned how Berlin is such a friendly scene. Now the population density in Europe on whole, and the fact that you've mentioned that you and other Berlin comics go to the UK, which is kind of sort of be a little bit more difficult with Brexit coming up. Or do you think is Brexit going to impair any of that travel, or just make it a little more annoying? Or,
well, I guess I don't want to give anyone any visa advice, because I think I know, like, when I went to perform at Fringe and stuff, like, there's like an exception and anyone can go and perform at Fringe. And I don't know, I think also for Canadians, if you're going to the UK as a casual artist, I think you don't have to apply for, I'm not sure, but people should look that up.
yes.
And I don't really think Brexit's going to have too big of an impact, because let's be honest, I think what a lot of people do is the main purpose of their vacation in the UK is to go on vacation. And then maybe they decide spontaneously they're going to do an open mic or something when they're there. And so that kind of arrangement's probably still going to be possible. But if you're going professionally, you should make sure you're following the visa rules, because don't want to get anyone in any trouble with that. But I think for Canadians and Europeans, we're still going to be able to go there for short periods of time. And the Edinburgh Fringe, I'm sure, is still going to continue to be like the event of the year worldwide. Other than like Montreal and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Now, but do you think you have access to more stages with that population density? Like Berlin had, I was amazed when I went to Berlin to find out exactly how many shows are going on, and the Berlin Comedy Cafe has been doing live stream improv shows and such during this time. But do you think the access and like train travel, just how easy it is to get around in Europe, it gives you a better access to stage and to more diversified audiences? Do you think
I think it does? And there are some comics here who've done a really good job of making a living off of all the opportunities in Europe, because you know, you can have your hour show even if you're still quite amateur and go to all of these big cities in each country, because there is an appetite for English comedy. And people are, even if you don't really have much of a name built up, people are kind of happy to give you a chance because they just want to have English comedy. So yeah, I mean, it is, I think, probably a very different experience than people doing comedy in Canada. I know when I've performed in Nova Scotia, for example, because that's where I'm from, I think a lot of people there, like, they do kind of road trips and they do a bunch of shows all over the Maritimes or the Atlantic provinces, which is, very different than here, where you can just hop on a high-speed train and go to the next city. And so, yeah, there are a lot of great opportunities. There are people doing tours in Switzerland, like you already said. So there are established nights in different cities there. There are shows in different parts of Germany as well. So there are lots of opportunities. So
it's just in Canada, it just seems it's like such a huge distance to go from from city to city to population center. It's just Europe has always been sort of the calling. A lot of Canadian comics are leaving the UK now, where that was sort of the that was the place to go to grow for a while. But some of Brexit has made it less appealing to Canadian comics to go over there. What do you see in the future when things do begin to open up? What's your hope for? Because you did the online Canada Day show. I mean, that was a sponsored event, and it had its difficulties. But do you think that online comedy or the fact that the tools are present and people have had the time to practice and use them during the lockdown, do you think that's going to affect comedy going forward, like the comedy community?
I enjoy the online thing as a kind of temporary solution, but it is very different. Like if you've done any like Zoom shows, or I've only done hosting so far. Actually, I haven't done actually like being on camera for 7 minutes and just doing a set without having any sort of reaction. Yes, so I don't know if it's going to replace what we really want to do, which is having that connection with people in person. But I think it's a necessary evil for the next little while. And I think it's better than nothing. And I think it's like Go West now. I do it with my co-host, Simone Hudson, who came on the scene after you were here, a lovely lady from New Zealand. And so she and I do it once a month. We do it online. And I like that because she and I are co-hosting. So it's never awkward because we just talk to each other. Yes. We have our audience kind of there with us. And that's kind of nice. But I don't think it's going to replace doing stuff live. For me, I think the online, what it forced me to do personally was to attempt videos more. Like silly videos. I've done a lot of more serious ones too, because I've just been in a more serious mood. But to
you're Celine Dion.
Yeah, exactly. You know, silly stuff like that.
Fantastic video. Check it out. That's on your Instagram, is it not?
That's on my Instagram. Yeah. So that was a promo for the Canada Day event. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that was really fun, and I love doing that stuff. And I had been putting off for such a long time learning how to use the software that I'm paying for on my computer. And so for me, even if I don't know if online shows are going to be something that I want to do forever, being stuck at home has forced me to do more on that kind of like technical side of things, which I think will be good in the long run.
Now, being in Europe, I don't know if I've been seeing that the protests are worldwide. I've seen videos from Berlin from marches. Do you think that we're actually going to get some positive social change over the other aspect of what's happening with the death of George Floyd, with the murder of George Floyd, with the call to action that has been generated from that?
I think there definitely will be. It seems to be at a level this time, unlike anything I've seen since I've lived here or that I've experienced in my life. And like people point out, I think it's a lot of like people who aren't Black, Indigenous, people of color who are compelled to go out and protest. So I think that's a really good sign. And in Germany, I guess the challenge is to take what has happened in the US with George Floyd's murder and to adapt it to the reality of life here in Germany, because there's racism here with the police. I don't think there's any question about that. I'm not in a very good position to comment on it, but it does exist for sure. And but I think the challenge is you have to take what we've learned from the States and then apply it to your local situation in a relevant way. It's like in Canada, there have been horrible incidents with Black Canadians in Toronto or other places, but also Indigenous communities. And I think that's like, for us, that's the thing that we need to focus on more is improving the situation for Indigenous Canadians and how they are what their relationship is with police forces.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's also how we respond to calls. Police don't have the training to really deal with somebody who's having a mental difficulty. And that seems to end in bloodshed far too often.
Yeah. No, it's
I'm really bringing this show down. I'm sorry. Just
I feel like I'm on the National
comedy
or something. Yeah, it's just exciting. So
yeah.
No, but I mean, this is it, right? And it's kind of like you can't. Everything that we've been dealing with over the past few months is so heavy. I think it's artificial to pretend that we're not going to talk about it. It's like I see some people proudly advertising that they're doing a show and they're not going to talk about like the pandemic or whatever. But I'm not saying you should just harp on that topic all the time or talk about Black Lives Matter all the time. But you have to. People are thinking about it. We can't. It's really phony if we don't even acknowledge that, I think. So.
Yeah. No, it's comedy has always been best comedy has always been a mirror on society, I think, and it is also, I believe, should be an engine for social change. And I do hope that we get to see more people sort of standing up, taking a point and helping us all move forward.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting too. I know we have. We have like our little, it's not a little, it's quite a big Facebook group in Berlin for people performing here on the scene. And after the BLM discussion, there was a lot of talk about how we were going to call out each other too on inappropriate material. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that moves forward here in Berlin. Comedy here generally tends to be quite politically sensitive anyhow, I would say. So people don't tend to bring stuff on stage that is really lazy and like overtly racist like that. But I think it's something we're going to have to deal with over the next few months for sure. So
yeah, most definitely. Ben, I want to thank you very much for joining me on the program. Is there anything that coming up that you want to plug before we move on, or just to follow you online?
Yeah, you can follow me at all those fantastic places that Paul already mentioned. I'm doing the Go West Comedy Show online, the online version, this coming Wednesday, actually. It's going to be at 4 o'clock. No, it's going to be at 3 o'clock Montreal time. 3 o'clock Montreal time.
So
and
8 p.m. Berlin time? We're 5 hours, aren't we?
6. 9.
6 hours.
So 9 o'clock here. So 3 for you folks in Quebec,
in Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and 9 o'clock for us here. And so if anyone wants to tune in and see that, or if anyone's watching and they want to take part in that online show, then feel free to drop me a line as well, because that's the great thing about doing the online format, is that we have people taking part outside of our normal cast of characters here in Berlin. So.
Yeah, and it'd be a great way for comedians around the world to be introduced to the Berlin comedy scene, and one of the producers there. So,
and as I always tell people, like if anyone's watching and they want to drop me a line with questions about the Berlin scene, don't hesitate to do that. I'm always happy to give people my take on where they might want to perform, and because it's a lot of shows. It's probably like double as many shows as when you were here, Paul. Oh, it's really like every night there are like 3 or 4 places where you can perform when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. So people might need, they might have some questions, and I'm happy to answer those questions. Don't hesitate to drop me a line. So
that would be fantastic. Thank you again, Ben. I do hope to get over in Berlin. If you're ever in Montreal, you definitely contact me. I have at least one show that you would definitely be fitting onto, and I can recommend you to a bunch of others.
Okay, that's very kind, Paul. And same I hope to see you over here sometime soon back at Go West. Yeah. And I hope everyone stays healthy and not too crazy during this whole situation.
But we started out crazy. Sorry. I apologize for that bad German-esque take. I don't know what. I actually I did an audition this morning for a video game in which I had to have a German accent.
Okay.
So it's I'm sorry, it just slipped at that point.
You're in the zone. We're not going to question it.
Exactly. Believe it or not, I've gotten a bit of work out of having a German accent,
awesome.
Considering that my German is incredibly poor.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
All right. Thanks again, Ben. Enjoy and best of luck into the future. Keep happy and healthy. This has been They Talk Funny, and my guest today has been Ben MacLean. Thank you all for watching. If you're watching it on the repeat, make sure to leave a comment on either YouTube or Facebook. And thank you all for tuning in. We're signing out now. Ciao.
Bye. Bye-bye.